Good morning. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on all of these occasions on our heritage.org website. We would ask our guests here in-house if you'll be so kind to check that cell phones have been muted as we prepare to begin, as a courtesy to our speakers. And, of course, our internet viewers are always reminded that they can send questions or comments at any time, simply emailing speaker@heritage.org. And we, of course, will post the program on the Heritage homepage for everyone's future reference as well. Leading our discussion today is Dr. Kim Holmes, who serves as Distinguished Fellow in our Catherine and Shelby Cullom Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy. He previously served us at Heritage as Vice President for Foreign and Defense Policy Studies. He was the founding editor of our annual Index of Economic Freedom, which has become the signature Heritage publication. From 2002 to 2005, it was his privilege to serve in the George W. Bush administration as Assistant Secretary of State for International Organization Affairs. Please join me in welcoming my colleague, Kim Holmes. Kim?
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation. I'd like to welcome the distinguished panelists. Some people I've known for 30 years, like Dove, and some who I've just met. It's a pleasure to have you here, gentlemen, with us this morning. The Heritage Foundation, for those of you who have been following our work, we have a long-standing interest in the issue of military reform. As a matter of fact, I was reflecting on this morning as I was preparing for the panel that when I first came to Heritage Foundation in 1986, one of the first things I worked on was the Goldwater-Nichols Act of that year, with some of the people that are still around town, some who are not. And we have been involved in this issue for many years, which I guess shows only that there's probably few topics that are as enduring as reforming the armed services. It's also a very timely event in the sense not only that the Military Commission for Retirement and Modernization, which we have the commission members here today, will be reporting on, but also because today Secretary of Defense Carter is rolling out the Force of the Future personnel policy reforms, and so there's a lot of interest in Washington, in the nation, on this topic. We are very pleased today to have 3 of the 9 commissioners of the Military Compensation and Retirement Modernization Commission. This commission was established in fiscal year 2013 Defense Authorization Act, and it had 3 main goals. One was to ensure the viability of the all-volunteer force. The second was to enable a quality of life for service members, and the third was to modernize and achieve fiscal sustainability for the military's compensation and retirement systems. The commissioners here today are uniquely qualified to address this topic. Between them, collectively, they share more than 10 decades of relevant military and personnel policy, budget, and legislative experience. Gentlemen, that's 100 years. Altogether, that's a long time. Wow, it makes us all seem a little old.
Yeah, I account for 90.
They were involved in this work for quite a long time, and they undertook a number of activities to ensure that they had the best information and ideas possible. They held public hearings. They met with key representatives of each of the uniformed services. They surveyed over 1 million active duty reserve and retired service members, and they also engaged with academic and research institutions. They've produced 2 reports. There was an interim report, both of these are online, which provide a comprehensive catalog of military pays, programs, and benefits. And then there's the final report of the Commission, which was submitted to the President and the Congress in January of this year. Now, one of the unique things about, unlike other blue ribbon panels, some of the recommendations of this commission have already been enacted. They're included in the 2016 Defense Authorization Act. Some of them are, which is turning out to be one of the most significant reform bills in recent years. It carries some reform recommendations from the Commission on Military Retirement Systems, for example. But while some of the recommendations have already been or are in the process of being enacted, there are some which still remain on the table, and it's mostly those, I think, in addition to getting a report on the Commission, that we also would like to discuss as well today. There are major recommendations on military health care, which have not been acted on, But it's my understanding that the chairman of the House and Senate Armed Services Committees have indicated that they will continue to working on them in next year's Defense Authorization Act. So with this is first of all, the first speaker. Well, actually, there don't be no speakers. They're going to be responding to my question. But with us today is Dov Zakheim. He's a senior fellow at the CNA Corporation and a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. From 2001 to 2004, he was Under Secretary of Defense, the Comptroller, and the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Defense. And it was, of course, in this role that he was a principal advisor to the Secretary of Defense on all budgetary and fiscal matters. Stephen Boyer was a member of the United States House of Representatives. He served 9 consecutive terms, and he represented Indiana's 4th Congressional District from 1993 to 2011. He had a long tenure in Congress, and he served on the Committee on Veterans Affairs and Armed Services, and he also had many years of active duty and reserve military service. Also with us is Michael Higgins. He served as a professional staff member of the Committee on Armed Services in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1990 to 2013. He served 7 committee chairmen and 8 subcommittee chairmen, and he is really one of the nation's best authorities on all aspects of military human resource policy and law across the military departments. So the plan here is for me to ask a series of questions and then have the commissioners respond, and then towards the end of the discussion, I will open it up for all of you to ask any questions that you may have and to make any statements you have. So I think what I'll do is I'll start with the first question. Either one of you or all of you can take it. What was the first priority in approaching these sets of issues? Was it mainly to save money for the Department of Defense, or were there other priorities? Or how did these various priorities work together?
Let me take a shot at it, and I'm sure my colleagues will do the same. First, Kim and I have known each other a long time, and I want to thank you for organizing this. I was actually an adjunct scholar here for quite a few years, so I have a soft spot for heritage. I think that when you look at what our priorities were, most people thought that our job was to save money. But that's not what we thought. Working with what was frankly a terrific staff, we've got several of them here. Bob Daigle is hiding in the corner, was our chief of staff. We all felt that the number one thing was to recognize that our military was not the same as it was when the all-volunteer force started, and that therefore we had to provide for the 21st century military. Now, what do I mean by that? When we had a draft, what did we do? We had young men, single young men by and large, who came in, served whatever couple of years they served or whatever, and the officers as well tended to be male. Didn't worry too much about the families. Totally different story today. We have male and female enlisted. We have male and female officers. We have families. We cannot simply focus on the person in uniform alone. We have to think about our military families. That already changes the way you think about the military. And over the years, we've done some things. But it clearly wasn't enough. And when you thought about everything from military health care to military child care, whether it's commissaries, whether it's financial literacy, whatever it might be, you were thinking about issues that really hadn't come up in a serious way when the AVF started. And then, of course, there was retirement. So we approached the question of how do we modernize and have our systems catch up to the nature of the military we have today and are likely to have tomorrow and want to have tomorrow. We've got the best fighting force in the world. We want to make sure it stays that way. And then, if in the course of doing that we could find efficiencies, and we were convinced we could, so much the better.
I think your opening question, while simple, is a pretty good predicate, because there is a motivation in the town here of Washington, D.C., And the predicate was that the personnel costs were escalating at a pace that it was, quote, unsustainable. And it's a mantra that began to build here in the town. And the mantra was also became a theme that is fed by the defense industrial base in this town. There are many companies that want to build things and they want to sell it to the United States military. And this defense industrial base has built itself over the last 80 years as a very powerful force in this town. And so the prime target, when you look at a period of sequestration, is go after the personnel costs, and then that will drive savings that you can then move over to spend on equipment and things. And so I can understand why that question gets asked. We approach this very, very differently. We approach this from the manner that our country had never really taken a strategic pause to examine the personnel benefits. We had come out of World War II, and Congress then began to grapple with how do we care for so many of the men who had come back from World War II and were wounded, and we began to build the VA system. We get ourselves coming out of Korea. We got the GI Bill, from whether it be from the American Legion to the VFW. Veterans were uniting to request additional benefits, ensuring that the government fulfills its promise to take care of those who've served and sacrificed. We end up ourselves in Vietnam. We come out of the Vietnam, and the country had lost a lot of endurance. Endurance meaning we'd fought these 3 wars based on a draft, and we went to the all-volunteer force. And as we went to the all-volunteer force, Congress began to this hodgepodge in this transition of coupling benefits out of the draft era to the all-volunteer force, and we get ourselves into the 1990s. Excuse me, into the 1990s, after Desert Storm, and President Clinton was elected to give the American people this peace dividend. And we began to cut the size of the military, and that was the big first rock back to the personnel systems. The military retirees were to be moved off the military treatment facilities and off onto the Medicare rolls. The health systems within DOD, which at the time, my gosh, you go back to in the 1980s, Mike, it was like 120 MTFs. I mean, it was almost the size of the VA health system. And so the military health system had to also then begin to reform itself within DOD. And we coupled that through the 90s. And, we then find ourselves in an extended war after 9/11. So this calling for a commission to actually look at all of these personnel programs had never been done like this in our nation's history. So that's why I call it this moment of strategic pause for the nation. So not only do we look at what we as a country provide from the moment someone takes that oath to defend the Constitution with their life. If you look at our interim report, I don't believe there's a treatise, there isn't anything that better, I think, that covers the total scope between DOD and VA of all of the benefits that one receives. And for someone who had worked in this system now for 25 years, I was even pretty surprised. And what we wanted to do was look at all of these programmatics and go at a level for which the Senate and House Armed Services Personnel Committees could not do. These are very talented folks that are also very overstressed. And so we took 2 years to go deep, do a deep dive into these benefits. And how could we drive efficiencies and effectiveness? How could we make things better? And not just for the moment, but over the horizon. So as the defense industrial base and our military leaders prepare that force for the fight after next, how does the benefit system sustain itself so we can recruit the very best to fight for this nation? And that was, I think, one of our enduring principles.
Perhaps I could add just a couple of thoughts. I think one of the outcomes of the highly experienced set of commissioners that we served with was that there was a fundamental understanding that there was a connection between the level of compensation and the sustainability of the all-volunteer force. I mean, we came to that conclusion intuitively, and the result was a mantra, do no harm. And we were not dollar-driven, and I think our process was different from the 25 studies that preceded us over the past 40 years that I'm aware of that looked at things like military retirement and military compensation. That's what made us unique and different. We were not dollar-driven. We didn't know the implications of some of our recommendations in terms of dollars until well after we had formulated the ideas that we felt were real modernization. And what is modernization? Modernization is keeping pace with life. And that's what we endeavored to discover. What are the attitudes out there? How have people changed? What are people truly interested in? And that's what we attempted to achieve. And I think under the leadership of Chairman Maldon that we made a very early decision. I think it might have very well been in our first meeting that we were not going to allow dollars to drive what modernization was going to be for us as an organization. And I think we went from there.
Many of the changes to the military retirement system that you recommended ended up in the Defense Authorization Bill. Could you describe what those are briefly? And also, if there are some that didn't make it, could you also mention those? And then also, a lot of people are curious about how you managed to get some of these recommendations accomplished so quickly in the bill. What was responsible for that?
Let me take a first stab. I'm going to give it to the experts. You know, the basis when in the 1999-2000 timeframe, when I served as a subcommittee chairman and worked with this gentleman, Mr. Higgins. At that time is when we created the TSP, and at the time we only had 25 million, I think, at the time, somewhere around there, Mike. And we knew that we wanted to extend to those in the military that for which the country was moving away from the defined benefit to this contribution, 401ks and IRAs, and we wanted those in the military to be able to benefit, but we also didn't have the money to do a match. And at the time, I think Mike would I'm going to put words in your mouth, but at the time we envisioned, we can't do it now, but at some time in the future, we could envision a blend. But we didn't know when that would occur. We really didn't. But the basis for this, I think, was really laid in 2000. So you said, how does this move so quickly? And I think there was a base that was laid. And as the country was beginning to move and to change, you have to remember, we have to recruit from the young adults. And what is it the millennials want? And you know, in order to, you have to change, you know, and change can be good. Let me yield to my colleagues.
The hybrid system is not inclusive of many new ideas. We've seen many of these concepts in previous studies over the last 45 years that I've been engaged in military personnel issues. These are not new ideas, but we structured them in a way that was different, and we included several initiatives that were far more innovative than had been seen in the past, and far more responsive to that modernization, that definition I just gave you of keeping pace with life. Our proposal offers those kinds of issues that people, current service members and the young people growing up that we hope to recruit and retain in the future, what they see as important to them. And we delivered that. in terms of just the elements, we first of all grandfathered the force, which was a very important consideration, and Congress mandated that, so it really was not a debatable point for us. And I tend to look at the glass being half full. We retained 80% of the defined benefit. Now, we did reduce that defined benefit. The 20-year vesting was retained, and we reduced some of that defined benefit associated with that, but 80% is retained. We added the thrift savings plan, mandatory contributions, 1%. We added automatic enrollment, which was, I think, in the final analysis, is going to be a very important tool for the system, because what we have learned over time is that when people make a commitment, they start to invest, they don't back away from that. They stick with it 95, 96% of the time. And I think we're going to encourage that, and Dove will talk to you at great length about the importance of financial literacy and the education program, which we considered critical to this element, but people are going to stick with it. They're going to vest the first day of the third year of service, which is earlier than any of the prior studies ever contemplated for a thrift savings plan. We thought that early vesting was important. Matching contributions, we had up to 5. The Congress only went to 4, which I thought was unfortunate, but they did continue that matching beyond 20 years of service, which in the end of the day we fully agreed with. Continuation pay, there's a lot of flexibility here for the services, and I think this is one of the innovative areas where we can be set apart from all those 25 studies that preceded us. There's some flexibility there for the services. We do have a mandatory element to that, and I think that's important that people see that at the 12-year point, they're going to get that pay and they can see it. They just may not know exactly how much it's going to be, but the services will have the flexibility to deal with problems and add money to that account. And then there's the lump sum, which is the other major innovative aspect of this. This is where an individual, we had up to 100% of the defined benefit that the individual would accrue from the date of retirement to Social Security age eligibility, which is 67 was our model age. They could take 100% of that, albeit a discounted amount of money, because you have to include the consideration of the time value of money. But there is a lump sum there. Nobody has ever offered up, to my knowledge and my memory of these studies in the past, ever offered up a lump sum option, which is, I think, a very popular option within the force and is going to drive a lot of interest in this new program, and I think pull in some people, because up to 12 years of service, they can opt into our proposal, opt into the proposal now adopted by the Congress, more accurately. So I think we're going to draw people into the system. This lump sum's a big benefit for reservists who don't see any money before age 60. They can get a lump sum now, although Congress delayed that to age 60. We'd like to have seen that right after retirement, but that's not the way that got adopted. But I think in sum, we have a system that reaches out to the people that we want to recruit and retain, is attractive for them, delivers the force that's necessary, pulls people through to 20 with very powerful economic tools, and in the end of the day is going to serve the nation, the all-volunteer force, and the people within that force very well. The one thing that I kind of wish Congress had adopted, but they did not, was the option for the Secretary of Defense to offer up a new eligibility window for retirement eligibility. and move the years of service, maybe not vest at 20, but maybe for some skill fields, vest at 15, for other career fields, maybe not vest till 25. This is the path to the future. This is how you reform military retirement in the long run without touching the third rail, the emotion that's embedded in the retirement issue. And I think that's an oversight that the Congress can correct in the future, because I think this is how you advance the concept of military retirement in the years ahead. Anyway, I hope that's helpful.
Kim, you also asked how we got to where we got, but I first want to, since Mike referred to some of the financial aspects, we pushed very hard for financial literacy, and Congress adopted that. And the reason is this. How do you know whether to decide to opt in or opt out of TSP? How do you know whether to decide, how to decide about, do you contribute 3%, do you contribute 4%? How do you know whether you take the lump sum or not? You've got to have a serious degree of financial literacy. And we went so far as to actually talk to the Australians about this and see how they managed it, because they actually have a very good literacy plan. I should also say that the reason you heard such a clear and detailed presentation by Mike Higgins is because Mike Higgins is the expert on military retirement, probably the expert in the country, which leads me to the second part of your question, which is how we got to where we got and why it was adopted so quickly. We kicked around a number of ideas, and the idea of a hybrid was actually Mike's. We approached the issue not even in a bipartisan way. We approached it in a nonpartisan way. We weren't. It didn't matter whether you were a Republican or a Democrat, liberal, conservative. That wasn't the issue. The issue was, as I think Steve pointed out, what could we do for our people? Full stop. That was it. So we took Mike's original idea and worked it, as we did all the other ideas we put forward, and achieved a consensus. And we did not, there's no minority report from this commission. There's no footnotes from this commission, because basically we all essentially formed an opinion and a set of proposals that we all were comfortable with, whether we were retired military, whether we were retired OSD officials, whether we were members of Congress, Senate, House, Republican, Democrat. It didn't matter. These were proposals that we all agreed to. Well, once you've got that, you're in a very different place. There are no footnotes. There is no alternative way. And so we came to the Hill and to the DOD in a united way that I don't think most other commissions have. And given that we really had a staff, which is the other thing, I've been on commissions before, most of us have, this staff was very finely attuned to the art of the possible. What could we do that would work? And these folks worked tirelessly and made their proposals, and we'd go back and forth with our staff on this, so that what finally came out was a degree of internal red teaming that really helped us to sharpen our proposals and make our case. And I think that's why, particularly on retirement, which clearly was a highly controversial proposal on a highly toxic issue, that's why we got to where we got.
Dov, we took listening, the word listening, we love to talk about it while we all talk, right? We took it to almost the extreme. And I use the word extreme because this town doesn't listen to the extreme. And while we didn't have serving on the commission a commissioner who was a retired sergeant major, which would have been a unique attribute, we made sure they were on our staff. But then we also went out across the country, and we tried to listen to the inputs and recommendations of so many. And did. And You know, having served in Congress for so long, we tried to use that listening skill set. At the same time, we're so restrained on our time. But this commission was unique in its listening capabilities.
I'd like to now move to the healthcare proposals, the recommendations that you were making. I know that the cost savings was not your top priority, but we all know that the military healthcare programs have been criticized for years for being very costly. And also, in recent years, as people involved in defense spending debates and the like, they would always come up with this problem of looking at top lines and the fact that spending in these areas increased and it was making it difficult to do funding in modernization and elsewhere. So basically just two questions. Could you say a few words about what your healthcare recommendations are? And then secondly, are there any savings or what are the cost implications of it? Probably a better way of asking it.
Part of the we go back to my earlier comments about the personnel costs are unsustainable. Well, one of the predicates of that statement dealt with the expansion of the costs of the military health system. And when I look at that, I can divide those escalation in cost, which doubled the budget over a decade. And that would have been, number one was the increase in benefits. Congress made a conscious decision, though, to increase these benefits. At the same time, there was an increase in the TRICARE eligible beneficiary population. And so we did TRICARE reform. We did the redesign of the pharmacy and extended that pharmacy benefit. And we have medical inflation that everybody else is dealing with, and we had the escalation in utilization. Those three ingredients are really strong predicates in the driving of the cost and the doubling of health. At the same time, we were in an extended war and dealing with some pretty severe and catastrophic injuries. And so we wanted to make sure that we recognize this. We're also in an extended war, but then what is that health system in itself? And we did an examination of the present system. Is it working well? Is it serving the beneficiaries well? And in comparison to other systems in the country. And while we like to talk about those who serve the nation and the families that support the warfighters should receive a special status in our country. And that special status is because the government recognizes their sacrifice, and we then surround them and cloak them with a package of what we call earned benefits. And when we looked at the health system itself today, it is a system that does not deliver on the promise. And it doesn't deliver on the promise because TRICARE as a system is broken. And the question is, can TRICARE of itself be fixed, or should it be replaced? And we made the judgment and the recommendation to the President and to the House and Senate, and thereby the American people, that the TRICARE as a system should be replaced. That that the system has become it's a weak health network and has very low reimbursement rates. And it's a system that only focuses on the reimbursement of procedures. And it's just these very large and cumbersome contracts. And people who are beneficiaries in that system are locked in a system. You want to talk about the ultimate socialized health system? It is TRICARE, where these beneficiaries, they don't have choice. And coming out of the creation of Medicare Part D experience that I had, where choice was embraced, and that Medicare Part D predicate of choice also came out of the FEHBP successes. And so could we bring that to the military beneficiaries? Now, we believed that that was possible, and so we called our proposal TRICARE Choice. We also recognize, though, when you look at the entire population of the beneficiaries served under the military health system, around 15% are the men and women in uniform. The entire health system is for everyone else. And so we did, and we just talked about this again this morning. Our approach on this was very different, I think, than others have looked at this issue in the town, I keep calling it the town, here in Washington, D.C. In that, coming out of this extended war, we talk about the readiness, capacities, and capabilities of the warfighter themselves. Well, you know what? We have the highest readiness profile of our medical teams now than in our entire history. So how do we began to focus on how do we maintain that capability? And we focused from the battlefield backwards. Often you cross the river, the Potomac, over to DOD, and you get the surgeons generals in here on this panel talking. They're going to focus on the MTFs first, and then they go back to the battlefield. It's two completely different ways to assess what should a military health delivery system look like. And we just gave a completely different examination. And we recognize, though, that as we move to a system of TRICARE Choice, how do you maintain the essential military capabilities and the readiness profile necessary so when they're deployed, we have the finest medical teams that can respond and save lives? We as a country have recognized, because in our communities we all know of someone who has returned from war and have incredible catastrophic injuries that we had never seen before. We had never seen these types of injuries because they never lived. They died on the battlefields. And our now medical logistics and our capabilities are so great that we as a nation now get to experience that. But I am pleased that while our proposals here for TRICARE Choice, in saying that if you wear the uniform today, you remain on active duty, you because of the operational readiness, you're served at the MTFs. With regard to the active duty, the families, the retirees who are non-Medicare eligible, the reserve components, the widows and orphans can remain in that system of TRICARE Choice. And while the House and Senate have now, they didn't act in this year's bill on our recommendations. What they have said is, and they have legislation in the defense bill that says they want to do health care and work with DOD in next year's bill. And we take them at their word. And we believe that they want to do that. There will be a tremendous pressure. Here you will feel it and see it in the town. Between the defenders of the status quo, I call them the gargoyles, who will defend the gates of the citadel known as the military health delivery system. And they will use every imaginable mantra to criticize anything that will change the MTF as you know it today. But if you really want to make sure that the beneficiaries have access to a quality health system, then we need to move to a different system, and that's what we recommend.
By the way, we didn't eliminate everything. There are some people who think we've overturned everything. You already heard military folks going to use MTFs, just as they have in the past. The pharmacy benefit, the dental benefit, that's not being changed. TRICARE for Life, which was so controversial, not being changed. Eligibility for care at MTFs for families, not being changed, except it'll be part of this larger choice, which is, insurance networks. They'll be part of the networks. And a couple of things. The first is, how has DOD dealt with the increase in the cost of medical care? They want to increase copays, and they want to lower benefits. So who gets it in the neck or in the chin? It's the families. What we try to do, and I think our plan does, is protect the families. They shouldn't be paying the penalty for the fact that TRICARE is an inefficient system. And one of the things we did as we created this TRICARE choice, and here I remember when we were doing this will give you a feel for how our commission worked. They all looked at me and they said, "You're the comptroller. We've got a plan to protect the system from the predations of the comptroller, because it's the comptroller that pushes the higher copays and the lower benefits. How do you protect it?" And I would say, well, they'd come up with an idea. No, I can get around that system. They came up with another idea. I can get around that system. So we finally came up with a system where OPM would administer TRICARE like they do the FEHBP. So the comptroller couldn't get his grubby little hands on it in the budget review. And again, comptrollers, once they put on that hat, it's not partisan at all. It's how do I deal with my money issues every year? So you can see that we were trying to do a number of things, everything that Steve just talked about, and at the same time protect the families, giving them the best services possible, making sure that the MTFs give the people in uniform who are wounded the best services possible, and at the same time not hit the families with costs that they really shouldn't be hit with. Now, there are lots of ways to achieve savings. One of them is to focus on wellness. Everywhere outside TRICARE, we all hear about wellness all the time. Well, how do you focus on wellness if you're in this system? Well, you really can't. But by creating what we call the basic allowance for health care and saying that, by the way, if you spend less money, have fewer times over over at the MTF or at your private carrier, which is more likely where they would go, you'll keep the money. You've got a financial incentive not to keep running and using TRICARE all the time, except for when you really need it. So not only does it protect the families from spending more, it actually gives them some money at the same time. So that the nation, the taxpayer doesn't have to spend more, but neither does the family, and the family can actually save. And by the way, when the family saves, the nation saves. So this is a win-win. And again, to repeat what Steve said, we were told by Chairman Thornberry, by Chairman McCain, they were going to take on retirement first. They kept their word. They took on retirement first. Now they're telling us we're going to go after the healthcare system next. And a lot of people I know were very skeptical when they said that. But they're going to do it. And the rankings are ready to do it. Again, this is not a partisan issue. This is to help our people in uniform and their families deal with a system that right now gives them less and costs them more. That's what we're trying to change.
I'm going to read specifically here. This is right out of the bill. Conferees agree that comprehensive reform of the military health system is essential and commit to working with the Department of Defense for fiscal year 2017 to begin reforming the military health care system. This reform must improve access, quality, and experience of care for all beneficiaries, maintain medical readiness of the military health professionals, ensure the long-term viability and cost-effectiveness of the military health system. The current system has not kept pace with the best practices and latest innovations of commercial healthcare market and will not meet the future needs of DoD and the service members, families, and retirees.
By the way, there's one other element that I think we can't overlook, and that is, what is the role of the MTFs, the military treatment facilities? By far, MTFs seem to focus on OBGYN activities. Now, the argument we've heard is, well, on the battlefield, we don't know what the next battlefield will look like, and therefore we need generalists. And so it's okay. We'll send the OBGYN out there when somebody has some kind of traumatic injury, be able to deal with it. So I ask you, if you had some kind of, the shotgun went off and hit your stomach, would you go to an OBGYN? If you broke your hand playing tennis Would you go to an OBGYN? Why are we going to give our folks in uniform anything less than we give ourselves? We go to specialists. Shouldn't they have specialists? Shouldn't they have people who know how to deal with trauma? There's nothing wrong with an OBGYN. I mean, I wouldn't have had children otherwise. That's not the issue. The issue is the people who defend us, who risk their lives for us and get wounded, they need to have the same level of treatment that we would give ourselves. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Now, these MTFs are really struggling today. I mean, you've got some MTFs out there that are at 50% of their capacity. But people, here's what we exposed, what DoD doesn't want people really to know. Of the top 10 inpatient procedures at the MTFs, you know what they are? So when they return from the battlefield and they come back, the number one procedure at an MTF is pregnancy and childbirth. Number 2 is newborn care. Number 3, advanced pulmonary treatments. 4th, hysterectomy and other uterine procedures. Next is small and large bowel procedures. Then it's joint replacement and reattachment of lower extremities.
Small percentages
Yeah.
in all those, beyond the childbirth.
Childbirth is huge. It dominates. And again, there's nothing wrong with that.
And then interesting, you go out and start talking to the moms. Talk to the beneficiary moms and ask them where they want to receive their care. Wow. Now the Surgeon Generals, I don't think they're listening out there to the mothers, the expectant mothers. It was pretty painful to listen to some horrific episodes of care, or I should say lack of care, by some mothers out there that could not gain the access that they needed, and there was a very bad result. And so we really wanted to look at this and say, how are we best serving the beneficiaries here? Are we actually going to hold on to the MTFs at below its capacity on these particular procedures? Are these not procedures that could be done in the private sector with utilizing best practices? And actually you're delivering the choice for which the beneficiaries want instead of locking them into a limited access socialized system?
Look, if the people working at MTFs are getting their training as OBGYNs, by the way, if they were in the civilian system and they needed to be able to qualify, you've got to do a certain number of procedures each year. To qualify for the kinds of things they would do in the field, they wouldn't qualify. So it's hitting both ways. The families aren't getting what they need, the way they want it, and the people who are being trained for the wrong things, because that's what an MTF does as well. It trains the people who are going to go out to the field. So this is totally lose-lose. Leaving the money aside for a minute, it's lose-lose in terms of what the families need and what the people in uniform need when, God forbid, they're wounded in the field. That's what bothered us.
I've been asked several times in recent months why the commission thought that such a radical solution for health care was needed, and second, why we felt it could be successful. And my response is, you only have to look at the environment, get involved in the environment, which I think we did to an extensive degree. The environment will tell you immediately that you have to break the mold of military health care in order to get to something that's going to be more effective and useful in the long run. If you just look at the environment, there is a fundamental disconnect between, as both Dove and Steve have mentioned, between peacetime health care and combat readiness. Those skills have been recognized as in diametric opposition to each other for the last 30 years that I've been around. Study after study have concluded that nobody has ever provided the solution to correct that situation. TRICARE usage is higher than the private sector, so there's got to be a management factor involved. There's general dissatisfaction with the military healthcare system. You got to talk to people. There are people that like their little TRICARE world and the MTF, that's for sure. But there's a lot of others that are very disappointed in the care they're getting. Maybe not the quality, but certainly access and choice they are not happy with. There's an absence of joint medical doctrine, requirements, a determination process, combat skills definitions and training are inadequate and separate among the services. It shouldn't be that way. The DoD contracting model is, ineffective. It's a model of ineffectiveness.
It's geared to saving money.
So what do? We step up with a Joint Readiness Command. We offer a 4-star to oversee readiness for the total force in all aspects, but including medical. We add new influence at the joint staff level with a new director to ensure that these kinds of readiness issues are addressed. We offer the concept of essential medical capabilities, which ought to be combat-driven or derivative from combat operations, and they're not all about trauma. We make that very clear in our report. There are other skills involved, and maybe childbirth can certainly be one in the sense of being an aspect of cohesion and humanitarian operations, but it's not the same emphasis that vascular surgeon or a trauma surgeon ought to be involved in, and that's where the emphasis ought to be. We change the financing of the MTF. We empower that MTF to pull in those combat-related skills and caseload to make them better at what we want them to do in the field, in combat. We tap into the private sector living contracts with the OPM running the operation and private sector contracts offering up their solutions, their effective healthcare management that they make a reality in the private sector, making the military healthcare system more effective. We're going to maintain or reduce active duty healthcare costs to the family for the vast majority of people. Retiree costs are going to go up, but they're going to be lower than most everybody else in America pays for health care, and they're going to go up very, very slowly. We'll end up at 20% in 15 years with a 1% increase over a 15-year period. Reserve health care options, we would offer the options for reservists to get new flexibility in how they treat health care, which is going to be a tremendous advantage for those people when they get called up and deployed. And as Dove mentioned, we're not suggesting any change to be made to pharmacy, dental, TRICARE for life. That's one of our findings, and in several areas, but certainly here in healthcare, there's some programs out there that operate very well, and they should not be tinkered with. But for me, the pivotal argument in turning our healthcare over to the private sector, giving people choice and access, which is what these people want. You go out and talk to them. I'll defy you to come back and look me in the eye and say they don't want choice and access, they want the same old socialized approach. That's not going to happen. But the argument that made the case for me was the reality of the contracting decisions that occur in the Department of Defense and in the private sector. They're very different, and I go back to my reliance on human nature as being the guiding light in everything we do in life, particularly in the military personnel business. But you have in the private sector a contracting motivation that doesn't exist at DOD. All due respect to the comptroller, Dove. That comptroller has got priorities that the private sector healthcare manager does not begin to understand. That healthcare manager has one objective: to compete Now, I'm not saying they're great humanitarians out there, and they're just in it for the love of the people and the care of the people. I'm not saying that at all, but they are motivated. Human nature dictates if they're going to stay in business, they got to appeal to people and pull them into their system. They got to offer something that people want. And I contend that's a choice and access that our people in the military want and need. In the Department of Defense, you come down to the tough budget decision. And what happens? You know, the needs of people, notwithstanding the best intentions of people inside our healthcare system, they are terrific people, and the surgeons and healthcare managers, they got to walk down the hall and talk to the comptroller. And the comptroller is not thinking about care of families. He's thinking about a wide range of challenges that I can't begin to comprehend sitting here. But I think it's an important difference in why I think this radical change is needed and why I think it's going to be successful in the long run.
Here's the irony. Not only will our proposal help the families, but it really will save the government money. 3 years after this proposal is implemented, the DoD budget goes down by $6 billion. Even comptrollers like that sum. Federal outlays goes down by over $1 billion. So we're going to save the country and the taxpayer money. But it's not going to be saved off of the backs of the military and their families. That's what's been going on. The families are getting worse service, which, oh, by the way, affects morale in the field, because all you need now is to email your spouse and say, the kids aren't getting the right service. And then all of a sudden you've got a battlefield morale problem.
Well, the skeptic would say, well, how can you save the money? You save the money that's what we do by changing the system. Mm-hmm. Right now, we're just doing these reimbursements based on procedures, not based on the outcome. Mm-hmm. And when I said that the system was broken, let's just go ahead and say, okay, it's a poorly run system. What does that mean? A poorly run system means it's one that has a very limited access and has very high utilization rates that drives the costs. So what we examine, when you look at the FEHBP that many federal employees here enjoy in this town, we actually looked at, go to one of our bases, military bases, or one of the forts, and you've got someone in uniform working next to a federal civilian employee at a depot, for example. That civilian working on that military base and their family are getting taken care of better than what the military family is being taken care of in a health system. That's a fact. And so let me use Fort Bragg as an example. So you're in the military, you're at Fort Bragg, your daughter is playing soccer, and all of a sudden she blows out her knee in a soccer game. That happens, right? So now you need to get her to an orthopedic surgeon. So you look at the catchment area of TRICARE within Fort Bragg. At Fort Bragg, within TRICARE, there are only 15 orthopedic surgeons signed up to provide TRICARE. 15? Out of that entire region? Do you realize if you worked at one of the, instead of working in the military, you worked in one of the civilians factory, and you had access to a Blue Cross Blue Shield plan, their network. That network is 163 orthopedic surgeons. Why? Because they get higher reimbursements. The GEHA, the Government Employee Health Plan, is 43. TRICARE is only 15. So that these parents now trying to get health care for their daughter are very limited in their choice of those doctors. Now, what drives DoD crazy is when I say, okay, tell me about the quality of those 15 doctors. Oh, Steve, how could you say such a thing? They're all licensed. Well, you're right, they're all licensed. But the TRICARE, as opposed to the public sector and the FEHB have learned where it used to be, well, don't go to Dr. Zackheim because he charges the highest fees for this procedure.
I'm a comptroller. What do you expect?
We're gonna go to someone who will reimburse us at below Medicare rates. Okay. Well, if you do that as a system, you all of a sudden you have increased failure rates, You also have longer recovery times, and you have more rehab. What the commercial sector has learned in its best practices, that they're now saying it's okay to go to the doctor here who is the best, because I get better outcomes. And so when you have a system that would actually contract based on a benefit at risk is better than just doing reimbursement for procedures. And that's why we felt we needed to change the system. I'm sorry to spend so much
One
time
last
on
point,
this.
this is a really important. There are twice as many OBGYNs at Fort Bragg as there are people who would deal with orthopedic surgery. Now, you're not going to go, if your daughter blew out her knee, you're not going to go to an OBGYN. But, yeah, it's twice as many. But now think about the battlefield. Somebody blew out their knee on the battlefield. Why do you want to give them an OBGYN? I'll stop there.
Okay. Let's take questions from the audience. If you could, do we have a microphone? Yeah, wait for the microphone. And if you could identify yourself, and in the interest of time, we really only have about 15 minutes. If you could just keep your one question at a time and keep it short, it would be greatly appreciated. Back up there. Yes.
Morning, gentlemen. Matthew
Yeah, I
Dalton,
understand.
defense fellow. My question is, was during your commission, did you take a look at the disability system? In my view, that seems to be the third circle in this Venn diagram of the interrelated pieces here.
Yes, we certainly had many discussions about it. And we understand it's a source of considerable frustration on Capitol Hill, within the force, and particularly those that have incurred injury and illness. There was a line, I feel, and I'll certainly allow Steve and Dove to give a view on this. In my mind, there was a line where we had to make some very difficult jurisdictional decisions about where we wanted to really try to have influence and where we were reaching too far. And given the immense implications for VA and any kind of an effort, we felt jurisdictionally that was a bridge too far. I also was prejudiced by my personal experience trying to deal with this system and correct it over my years on the staff in the House Armed Services Committee. And I knew it was fraught with many, many difficult issues, and most of those being intractable financial issues. And I just didn't see a path forward for modernization, real, holistic, structural change that's going to make a difference in people's lives. I didn't see a path forward, and I did not speak optimistically about change there. But I think jurisdictionally we drew a line.
Yeah, what we did, we drew that line when I have to go back to when I chaired the House Veterans Affairs Committee. We created a commission that actually looked at disability, and at that time, while they were meeting, President Bush then created the task force called Dole-Shalala, and the Dole-Shalala recommendations, excuse me, began to, I don't want to say Bigfoot the commission, but a lot of they got bigger, a lot more attention, and a lot of them had been implemented. And so what we did do is we looked at the commission's recommendations with Dole-Shalala and to look at what had been implemented. And then we decided, you know what, in order for us to be, as a commission, to be effective, we're going to have to draw the line with regard to what we feel we can do. And so we stopped there, to be honest with you.
Other questions?
Steve Rodriguez, thanks for what you guys have done. So I grew up in a military family, and vividly remember the, I guess, military health reforms of the 90s, and the left a visceral impact on a lot of people in the community. How they say how that went, and it was not good. That also left a, I guess, a lasting impression towards anyone messing with the benefits package that that you receive as an active duty or retiree in the service. So I guess, given your comment about the Hippocratic Oath, how do you plan on communicating these changes, large or small, to the community writ large? And also, as an addendum to that, how do you work to mitigate, I guess, cost growth that we're currently experiencing? Thanks.
Let me try
You know,
that.
to do no harm, if that's the mantra, to do no harm, then that's the predicate that tells you must change.
Right.
Because to leave people in the system that is not serving their interest is to do harm.
Well,
And that drove us to this, you know, to change the system. It really is. If you recall, when in the 1990s, going to TRICARE and trying to recruit doctors to a system that would reimburse at such lower rates was very, very challenging for the contractors. And the contractors at that beginning that you were experiencing out there, my gosh, they were signing up doctors that would go against the migratory patterns of people for healthcare. You know, we as a people, we don't think about ourselves as a human animal, but what we do is we think that if I go to a bigger town or if I go to the bigger city, each time I get bigger, I get better for my health care. If you live in a smaller town or city and you go to a smaller town for that health care, you feel like you're going down. It's just a human psychology. And it was strange how the contractors were signing up doctors and forcing people to move against a migratory pattern for which they would receive their health care. Those were the early pains that they had to break through. But with regard to the larger incentive as a nation, we as a commission, we never saw this as a painful move. The pain is as a nation is to leave a beneficiary in such a poor performing health system. That's to do harm.
Steve mentioned in his first remarks that we spent a lot of time listening. We heard a lot about this system. This isn't something we just cooked up on our own in some little office with no windows. We went out to bases. We went out to posts. We went out all over the place. And we listened to everybody. The SGs came in several times to talk to us. We listened to the defenders, we listened to the opponents, but most important of all, we listened to the people in uniform and their families. And what we heard led us to where we are. We also, by the way, took a major poll, huge poll, bigger than anyone I think ever has done before. And this was before our report was finalized, so it was preliminary, but we already had a pretty good sense of where we were going. And we got support overwhelmingly there. And finally, the last point is, you don't want to increase the expense to the families. And there's two ways you increase the expense. Either they pay more, like co-pays, or they get less, which means they're still paying more. And that's what's been going on because, you know, the comptroller has, you know, wears the black hat because comptrollers don't have a heart. And so, I'm sorry, but we don't. You know, it came back. I didn't, for 3 years, I didn't have one. And then all of a sudden, I found it was beating again when I left the Pentagon. That's because we have to focus on how to save money so that other parts of the DoD budget can get what they need, so that the soldier, sailor, airman, Marine has the bullets, has the weapons, has what they need to fight and win. But at the same time, you've got this other need. And so what we've been doing is approving plans that would save the DoD budget by cutting the benefits or increasing the co-pays. That does not do anybody any good. And the only way you can get out from under that is by totally changing what TRICARE is about. It's as simple as you can't tinker on the margins. You can't make slight changes. It doesn't work because the budgetary costs are inexorable and they keep going up. The only way you can stop this, and at the same time do no harm, as Steve and Mike have just been talking about, is by changing the system, and that's where we got to.
We have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
Joe Davis from the Veterans of Foreign Wars. More of just a comment. 2 years ago, the VFW, along with several other organizations, we were among the first organizations to testify before the commission. At that particular time, we were extremely leery of a slash and burn mission for the commission. I have to say that you folks did an excellent job, very, very thorough. We do not agree entirely with everything you propose, but it does lay a perfect game plan out there for just to work on. And we know the health care changes are going to be it's going to be a fight. But I just want to thank you all for what you did.
Thank you, sir. Any final words?
Talk to your congressman, talk to your senator, repeat what you just heard.
Well, it's clear that, particularly in healthcare, there's still a lot of work to be done. So I'm thinking, Justin, maybe sometime next year, after the next defense authorization bill, we should invite you all back and do this again and see what kind of progress was made in the coming year. But I want to thank all of you for being here today, for your excellent presentations. I want to thank you on behalf of Heritage and, frankly, on behalf of the country for tackling this very difficult problem. It's something that's been out there for many years, and it's obviously not easy, but also takes a lot of imagination and political courage to tackle it. I just want to personally thank all three of you for doing that. And I thank all of you as well. So if you could join me in giving a round of applause to our guests.